My son can't hear because of you. Do you have any idea what you've done to my bloodline?
I took him to every doctor. I never missed one appointment. You know that.
His son's deaf ear destroyed his ex-wife's life, until the billionaire CEO learned the truth about his mistress. The billionaire's voice shook the walls of the penthouse. What have you done? The woman kneeling on the marble floor looked up, bloody tweezers still trembling in her hand. Behind her stood a 9-year-old boy, tears streaming down his face. But for the first time in his life, those tears made sound. "Dad," the boy whispered, his voice rough and uncertain. "I can hear you." The man went rigid, his briefcase falling from his hand and crashing against the floor. The sound made the boy flinch. "What?" "Your voice," the boy said, reaching up to touch his own throat in wonder. "Is it your voice?" But the father's eyes were locked on the woman's hands, on the blood, on the dark mass sitting in her palm like evidence of a crime. "Security," he bellowed. "Now." "Sir, please," the woman begged, holding out her palm. This was inside his ear. This is why he couldn't hear. "I didn't hurt him. I saved him." "You're not a doctor," the man roared. "You could have killed him. You had no right." The woman's heart shattered as 2 guards grabbed her arms. "I gave him his hearing," she whispered. "Or you got lucky," the father said, his voice cold as winter. "Pack your things. I want you gone. Tonight." The boy was screaming now, a sound he'd never made before, loud and broken and desperate. "Don't send her away. Please, Dad. She helped me. She's the only one who saw." But the father had already turned his back. Have you ever seen something everyone else missed? Have you ever known a truth but been powerless to speak it? Have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and saving someone who couldn't save themselves? This is a story of 3 people trapped by pride, silence, and secrets. A father who destroyed his wife to avoid guilt. A mistress who was never supposed to care. And a child who suffered because no one was brave enough to look. What that woman found in that boy's ear exposed a lie so devastating. It would shatter a billionaire's empire, vindicate a destroyed mother, and prove that sometimes the most unlikely person is exactly who God sends. Before we dive deep into this story, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because the stories on this channel will change how you see the world. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and let's build this community together. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Dominic Ashford didn't believe in second chances. Not in business. Not in love. Not in life. When something broke, you replaced it. That philosophy had made him a billionaire by 40. That same philosophy had made him ruthless. And that's exactly what he'd done with his marriage. He'd replaced her. The Seattle skyline stretched before him now, glass and steel piercing the perpetual gray sky. His corner office sat 73 floors above the city, above the noise, above the mess of ordinary lives. From up here, everything looked clean, manageable, controlled. But control was an illusion Dominic had perfected, even as it slowly killed him. His son Julian was 9 years old and had never heard his father's voice. Born deaf, profoundly, irreversibly deaf. Every specialist from Boston to Berlin had confirmed it. Genetic, they said. Congenital hearing loss. Nothing to be done. The words had echoed in expensive hospital rooms across 3 continents. Tokyo, Zurich, Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic. Millions of dollars spent. Thousands of hours in waiting rooms. Dozens of doctors with framed degrees and sympathetic faces, all saying the same thing. Your son will never hear. Accept it. Learn to live with it. Love him as he is. But Dominic couldn't accept it. Wouldn't accept it. Because acceptance felt like surrender, and Dominic Ashford had not built an empire by surrendering. So he needed someone to blame, and he'd chosen Lydia, his wife, Julian's mother, the woman who'd loved that boy from his first silent breath. It has to be her genetics, Dominic had told himself late at night, when sleep wouldn't come. Her family, her failure, her fault. Never mind that the doctors found no clear hereditary pattern. Never mind that Lydia's family had no history of deafness. Never mind that she'd beg him to stop searching for fault and start accepting their son. Julian is perfect as he is, she'd whisper one night, tears in her eyes. He doesn't need to be fixed, Dominic. He needs to be loved. But Dominic had seen that as weakness, as acceptance of defeat, as a mother who'd given up on her own child. The truth was darker, simpler, more human. Every time Dominic looked at Julian's silent face, he saw accusation. He saw his own failure reflected back. He saw the son who would never hear him say, "I love you," who would never hear music, who would never hear laughter or rain, or the sound of his own name spoken with joy. And Dominic couldn't live with that reflection, so he decided to shatter the mirror. The marriage had crumbled slowly, then all at once. Every conversation became an argument. Every disagreement about Julian's care became a war. Lydia wanted to embrace sign language, to build their lives around Julian's world. Dominic wanted to keep searching for cures, for treatments, for someone who could do what all the others had failed to do, make his son normal. She's holding him back. Dominic told his attorney one afternoon in a mahogany-paneled office that smelled like leather and ambition. She's accepted his disability. She stopped fighting. The attorney, a man named Richard Webb who built a career on destroying spouses in divorce court, had leaned back in his chair and smiled. Then let's paint that picture for the judge. And that's exactly what they did. The divorce was vicious, calculated, designed to destroy. Dominic had resources Lydia couldn't match. Attorneys who knew how to twist love into negligence, who knew how to paint a mother's dedication as dangerous obsession, who knew exactly which words to use to make devotion sound like instability. In the courtroom, under fluorescent lights that made everyone look half dead, they presented their case. Mrs. Ashford has refused to pursue viable treatment options. Richard had said, his voice smooth as poison. She's prioritized her own emotional comfort over her son's potential for a normal life. She's shown an inability to accept the severity of his condition, which has prevented proper medical intervention. It was lies wrapped in legal language. Twisted truth presented as concern. Lydia's attorney, a kind woman named Sarah Chun, who worked for a fraction of what Richard charged, had fought back. Mrs. Ashford has done nothing but love her son. Sarah had argued. She's learned sign language fluently. She's created a home where Julian feels safe and valued. She's followed every piece of medical advice, while also accepting her child exactly as he is. That's not neglect. That's unconditional love. But the judge, an older man with gray hair and tired eyes, had reviewed the evidence, the expert testimonies Dominic's money had purchased, the psychological evaluations that subtly suggested Lydia's emotional state was fragile, the financial statements that showed Dominic could provide resources Lydia never could. In the end, money had spoken louder than love. The judge granted Dominic primary custody. Lydia was given supervised visitation twice a month, 2 days out of 30, 4 days out of 60, 48 hours to be a mother to the child she'd carried and birthed and loved with every breath in her body. The settlement was designed to punish. Dominic's attorneys had made sure of it. Prenuptial agreements were enforced. Assets were divided in ways that left Lydia with barely enough to survive. The house they'd built together, Dominic kept it. The vacation home in Aspen, the investment accounts, protected before the marriage. Lydia walked out of that courthouse with a check that wouldn't last a year and visitation rights that felt like a prison sentence. Dominic told himself he'd won, that he'd done what was necessary, that Julian needed structure and resources, not a mother who wept over him and whispered that he was perfect in his silence. But late at night, when the Seattle rain pelted against the windows of his penthouse and Julian slept down the hall in a room decorated by an interior designer who'd never met the boy, Dominic sometimes wondered if he destroyed the only person who'd ever truly loved his son. He pushed the thought away. He was good at that, pushing away anything that made him feel. 3 years had passed since the divorce. 3 years of Julian living in the penthouse like a beautiful ghost. 3 years of Dominic telling himself everything was fine. But nothing was fine. Julian moved through the massive penthouse like he was trying not to be noticed, like he was apologizing for taking up space in his own home. He had a nanny, a woman named Ingrid from Sweden who managed his schedule with ruthless efficiency. She fed him balanced meals. She ensured his clothes were pressed and appropriate. She drove him to his tutoring sessions and speech therapy appointments. But she didn't love him. Not really. She managed him like a project, not a person. The other staff barely acknowledged Julian's existence. The housekeeper would clean around him as if he were furniture. The chef prepared his meals, but never asked what he liked. The private tutors came and went, teaching him in isolation, then filing reports for Dominic to review like quarterly earnings statements. Julian's world was silent in more ways than one. Dominic saw his son at breakfast most mornings, though calling it seeing was generous. He'd sit at one end of the long marble table, reviewing emails on his tablet. Julian would sit at the other end, eating fruit and whole grain toast, his eyes downcast. Sometimes Dominic would glance up and catch Julian staring at him. The boy would look away quickly, hands moving in small signs that Dominic had never bothered to learn. "I'm fine," the tutor had translated once. "That's what he's saying. He says he's fine." "Good," Dominic had replied, returning to the screen. But Julian wasn't fine. Anyone who actually looked could see that. The boy spent hours sitting by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city below, watching people walk on sidewalks 73 floors down, watching cars move like toys, watching a world he was part of but separate from. He'd press his small hand against the cold glass and hold it there until Ingrid called him away for another appointment, another lesson, another hour trying to fix what everyone had decided was broken. And there was something else. Something no one seemed to notice. Julian touched his left ear constantly. It was a small gesture, easy to miss. His fingers would brush against it briefly, then pull away. And when he did, his face would tighten just slightly. A micro-expression of discomfort that came and went so quickly you'd miss it if you weren't paying attention. But no one was paying attention. Ingrid had mentioned it once to Dominic in passing. "The boy touches his ear frequently," she'd said in her clipped accent. "It appears to be a nervous habit, perhaps anxiety-related." Dominic had nodded without looking up from his laptop, added to the report for his therapist. And that had been the end of it. A child's pain reduced to a line item in a medical file. This was the world Dominic had built. 73 floors above the mess of real life. Everything controlled. Everything managed. Everything except the guilt that gnawed at him when he allowed himself to feel it, which wasn't often. He'd become very good at not feeling. That's where things stood when Naomi Reeves entered his life. She arrived like a carefully crafted illusion at a charity gala on October evening. The event was held at the Four Seasons, all crystal chandeliers and champagne, and people wearing their wealth like armor. Dominic attended these functions because his publicist insisted. Good for the image. Good for business. Good for being seen as a man who cared about causes he'd never actually thought about. He was standing by the bar, bored and counting the minutes until he could leave, when he saw her. Emerald dress. Dark hair pulled back to show her neck. A smile that looked genuine but was calculated down to the angle. She was beautiful in the way Seattle women at charity galas were beautiful. Polished. Perfect. Presenting a version of themselves that had very little to do with who they actually were. Dominic recognized the performance because he was performing too. She'd approached him with confidence that didn't seem desperate. That was the trick. Seeming interested without seeming like you needed anything. "You're Dominic Ashford," she'd said. Not a question. A statement. "Guilty," he'd replied, gesturing to the bartender for another scotch. "Naomi Reeves," she'd said, extending her hand. "I've followed your work in sustainable tech development. The partnership you formed with the Norwegian energy sector was brilliant." She'd done her research. That much was obvious. Most people at these events asked about his money. She'd asked about his strategy. They'd talked for 20 minutes. About business. About the city. About nothing that mattered, and everything that did in the social chess game. They were both playing. He'd invited her to dinner the following week. She'd accepted with just the right amount of consideration. Not too eager. Not too aloof. Within 2 months, she'd moved into the penthouse. Not as his girlfriend. They'd never used that word. She was simply there. Beautiful and uncomplicated, and exactly what Dominic wanted. Someone who didn't ask him to feel. Someone who didn't demand he'd be better than he was. Naomi Reeves was 29 years old and had learned a long time ago how to survive in a world that rewarded appearance over authenticity. She'd grown up in foster care, though she never talked about it. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 11. No other family had stepped forward to claim her, so she'd been absorbed into the system, moved from house to house, family to family, never staying long enough to belong. She learned early that depending on others was dangerous, that love was something people promised but rarely delivered, that the only person you could count on was yourself. So she'd build a strategy. Be wanted, not needed. Be desirable, not vulnerable. Give people what they wanted, and take what you needed in return. It had worked. Mostly. She'd put herself through community college working 3 jobs. She'd learn how to dress, how to speak, how to move through rooms full of wealthy people like she belonged there. She'd dated men who could offer her things. Connections, opportunities, security. Not love. She'd stopped believing in that. Dominic had been easy to read. Wealthy, powerful, emotionally unavailable. Exactly the kind of man who wanted a beautiful woman in his home and his bed, but didn't want the complications of actual intimacy. She'd moved into the penthouse telling herself it was temporary, a means to an end. She was saving money, making connections, positioning herself for a future where she'd never have to depend on anyone again. She told herself she didn't care about the sad little boy who drifted through the massive space like a ghost. Julian. The first time she saw him, he'd been sitting by the floor, the ceiling windows, staring at the rain. He didn't turn when she entered, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. "That's my son," Dominic had said, not looking at the boy. "He's deaf. Don't bother trying to talk to him. He has tutors for that." The message had been clear. Julian wasn't her concern. She was there for Dominic, not for his damaged child. So Naomi had kept her distance. She'd lived her separate life within Dominic's world. She'd accompanied him to dinners and galas. She'd smiled for photos. She'd played the role of the beautiful accessory. She'd learned quickly not to ask about Julian's mother. That topic made Dominic's jaw tighten and his eyes go cold. She couldn't handle his condition, was all he'd say. She made everything worse. Naomi would nod and change the subject. It wasn't her business. It wasn't her life. But she couldn't stop watching Julian. The boy was heartbreakingly beautiful. Dark hair that fell across his forehead. Enormous gray eyes that held too much sadness for a 9-year-old. He moved through the world so carefully, as if afraid to take up too much space. As if apologizing for existing. His tutors came and went. Sign language specialists. Speech therapists. Educational consultants. They worked with him in the study behind closed doors. Dominic would review their progress reports like business metrics, measuring his son's value in data points and developmental milestones. But Naomi noticed something else, something that had nothing to do with progress reports. Julian touched his left ear constantly. It was such a small gesture. His fingers would brush against it briefly, then pull away quickly, and each time his face would tighten, just for a second. A flash of discomfort that came and went so fast you'd miss it if you weren't watching. But Naomi was watching. She saw it at breakfast, when Julian sat alone at the far end of the marble table, eating fruit he didn't seem to taste. She saw it in the evening, when he did homework in the corner of the living room, trying to be invisible. She saw it late at night, when she couldn't sleep and would find him standing by the windows, small hand pressed against his ear, shoulders tense with pain no one else seemed to see. She mentioned it once to Ingrid, the nanny. "Have you noticed Julian touches his ear a lot?" Ingrid had barely glanced up from her phone. "He does that sometimes. It's a nervous habit. The child has many anxieties." But it didn't look like anxiety to Naomi. It looked like pain. She told herself it wasn't her problem. She was the mistress, not the mother. Getting involved would complicate everything. Dominic valued her specifically because she didn't interfere with his life. She was an escape, not a responsibility. But every time she saw Julian wince, something twisted in her chest. A feeling she spent years learning to suppress. The instinct to protect a child who had no one. Weeks passed. Naomi settled into the rhythms of her borrowed life. Shopping during the day. Dinners with Dominic's business associates in the evening. Charity events where she wore designer dresses. and smiled for photographers who never asked her name. It was comfortable, easy, exactly what she'd wanted. Except she couldn't stop thinking about Julian. The way he sat alone in his room for hours, building model airplanes with careful precision. The way he'd watch his father at breakfast, hands moving in signs Dominic never responded to. The way he pressed his face against the window glass and watched other children playing in the park's 73 floors below. The way he touched his ear and winced and tried to hide the pain. One afternoon in early October, Naomi was reading in the living room when Julian came in. He didn't notice her at first. He sat on the floor by the coffee table and pulled out a puzzle. His movements were slow, methodical. He was working on a 1,000-piece puzzle of the solar system. Naomi watched him over the edge of her book. His small fingers placed pieces carefully. And then, without warning, his hand went to his left ear. He touched it briefly. His whole face tightened in pain. And Naomi saw something she hadn't seen before. When he pulled his hand away, he looked at his fingers, like he was checking for something. She set down her book and moved closer. Julian noticed her and froze, like a deer caught in headlights. Naomi smiled gently. She pointed to the puzzle, then gave him a thumbs up. Julian's eyes widened slightly. No one ever acknowledged his projects. No one ever seemed to care. He pointed to a piece of the puzzle, then to a space where it might fit. Naomi picked up the piece and handed it to him. He tried it. It didn't fit. She picked up another piece and pointed. He tried it. Perfect fit. The smallest smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. And in that moment, something shifted in Naomi's chest. Something she'd been fighting for weeks. This child was alone. Completely, devastatingly alone. In a penthouse full of staff and tutors and resources, he was the loneliest person she'd ever seen. Just like she'd been. In all those foster homes, surrounded by people but belonging to no one. Sleeping in houses where she was fed and clothed but never loved. Moving through the world trying to be small and quiet and not a burden. She saw herself in Julian's careful movements. In his quiet existence. In the way he tried so hard not to need anyone. And she made a decision she couldn't take back. She was going to pay attention. She was going to see him, even if it complicated everything. That evening at dinner, Dominic was on a phone call that lasted through the entire meal. Naomi sat across from him, pushing food around her plate, barely listening to him talk about quarterly projections and market forecasts. Down the table, Julian ate his dinner in silence. Ingrid had already left for the evening. The boy was alone with two adults who weren't paying any attention to him. Naomi watched him take a bite of chicken, watched him reach for his water glass, watched his hand drift his left ear, watched him touch it and flinch and lower his hand quickly. She waited until Dominic ended his call. "I think something's wrong with Julian's ear," she said quietly. Dominic looked up from his phone, distracted. "What?" "His left ear. He keeps touching it. And when he does, he looks like he's in pain." Dominic waved his hand dismissively. Ingrid mentioned that. It's a nervous habit. His therapist is aware. But what if it's not just a habit? What if something's actually wrong? Dominic's expression hardened. The same expression he used in boardrooms when someone questioned his judgment. Julian has been examined by the best specialist in the world, Naomi. If something was wrong, they would have found it. But he has anxiety, Dominic interrupted. He has obsessive behaviors. It's documented. The therapist is addressing it. Have you asked him about it? He's deaf, Naomi. Conversation isn't exactly simple. But you could try, she said, her voice softer now. You could ask. Dominic stood up, clearly done with the conversation. I appreciate your concern, but Julian's medical care is handled by professionals. You don't need to worry about it. He walked away, already pulling up another email on his phone. Naomi sat there for a long moment, staring at her uneaten food. Then she looked down the table at Julian. He was watching her. Their eyes met, and in that moment, she saw something that broke her heart. Hope, tiny and fragile and desperate, like he'd been waiting his whole life for someone to notice, for someone to care, for someone to see that he was hurting. Naomi gave him a small smile. Then she stood and walked to his end of the table. She pulled out her phone and opened a notes app. She typed slowly. Does your ear hurt? She showed him the screen. Julian stared at the words, his eyes filled with tears. And slowly he nodded. Naomi's throat tightened. She typed again. For how long? Julian held up both hands. All 10 fingers. 10 days? He shook his head. He pointed to himself, then held up 9 fingers. 9 years. Naomi's breath caught. She typed with shaking hands. You've had pain in your ear for 9 years? Julian nodded. Tears spilled down his cheeks. And no one ever noticed, Naomi whispered. The boy who'd never heard his own name spoken with love was crying silently, and Naomi felt something inside her chest crack wide open. All the walls she'd built, all the distance she'd maintained, all the protection she'd carefully constructed around her heart. It shattered. She pulled Julian into her arms and held him while he cried. His small body shook against hers, and she whispered into his hair, even though he couldn't hear her, I see you. I see you, baby. I promise I see you. And from that moment, everything changed. That night, Naomi couldn't sleep. She lay in the guest bedroom staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Julian had been in pain for 9 years. 9 years of touching his ear. 9 years of small winces no one noticed. 9 years of suffering while doctors declared there was nothing wrong. But what if they'd missed something? What if everyone had been so focused on his deafness being genetic that they'd never look for a physical cause? Naomi grabbed her phone and started searching. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen. Can ear blockage cause deafness? She typed. The results flooded her screen. Yes. In rare cases, physical blockages, cholesteatoma, impacted cerumen, foreign objects, can cause complete hearing loss if left untreated. She read further, her heart pounding. Often misdiagnosed as congenital deafness, particularly in young children, can be corrected with simple removal procedure. Naomi sat up in bed, her hands shaking. She clicked on medical journals, studied diagrams of the ear canal, read case studies of children who'd been declared permanently deaf until someone finally looked closely enough. One case stood out. A 7-year-old boy in Michigan, deaf from birth, according to every test, until a nurse practitioner noticed him touching his ear during a routine checkup. She looked with an otoscope and found a growth blocking his entire ear canal. One simple procedure. 30 minutes. The boy could hear perfectly. The article included a quote from the mother. We saw 23 specialists. 23 doctors told us nothing could be done, but one person cared enough to actually look. Naomi stared at those words until they blurred. One person cared enough to actually look. She thought about Julian, about the specialist Dominic had taken him to, the expensive doctors in their expensive offices. Had any of them actually looked? Or had they just run their tests, confirmed the genetic diagnosis, and sent them away? She thought about something else too. A memory from when she was 16, living in her 4th foster home. There'd been another foster kid there, a boy named Marcus. He'd been deaf in one ear. The foster parents had accepted it, never questioned it. But Marcus had complained about pain, about pressure, about feeling like something was stuck. No one listened. Foster kids complaining were considered problem children. But Naomi had listened. She convinced the school nurse to look. The nurse had found an impacted mass of wax and debris that had built up over years. One irrigation procedure later, Marcus could hear again. He cried in the nurse's office. Not from pain, from relief, from the overwhelming experience of sound returning to a world that had been silent. Thank you, he'd said to Naomi. Thank you for not giving up on me. She'd been 16 years old and had saved someone by simply paying attention. Now she was 29, and another child was suffering because no one was paying attention. Naomi looked at the clock. 2:17 in the morning. She should sleep. She should forget this. She should remember that she was just a mistress, not the mother, not a doctor, not anyone who had any right to interfere. But she couldn't stop thinking about Julian's face when she'd asked if his ear hurt. The tears, the relief of finally being seen. She grabbed her phone and kept researching. By dawn, she'd read everything she could find. Symptoms of ear blockages, procedures for removal, risks and complications, success rates. Everything. And she'd made a decision. If Julian showed signs of acute pain, if she saw clear evidence of blockage, she would act. Not because she had the right, because she had the courage. 2 days passed. Dominic left for Tokyo on Thursday morning for a week-long merger negotiation. The penthouse felt different without him. Quieter, less tense. Naomi spent those days watching Julian even more carefully. She left small gifts for him. A new model airplane kit. A book about space with beautiful photographs. A chocolate bar hidden under his pillow. She never saw him find them, but they always disappeared. And sometimes she'd find small drawings left in places she'd see them. Stick figures of a woman and a boy. Stars and planets. A simple heart drawn in crayon. He was 9 years old, and communicating the only way he knew how. Thank you for seeing me. That's what the drawings meant. Thank you for caring. Naomi kept every single one. On Friday evening, she was in the living room reading when she heard it. A sound from the hallway. A soft thump, like something falling. She looked up, listening. Nothing. Maybe she'd imagined it. Then she heard it again. A muffled sound, barely audible. Naomi set down her book and walked toward the hallway. Her heart was already beating faster. She found Julian collapsed on the marble floor outside his bedroom. He was on his knees, both hands pressed tight against his left ear. His small body was curled forward. His face was twisted in agony. Tears streamed down his cheeks, but no sound came from his throat. He was crying in complete silence. Naomi's heart stopped. She dropped to her knees beside him. Julian, she said, even though he couldn't hear her. She touched his shoulder gently. He flinched, his eyes flying open. They were red, wet, filled with pain and terror. Naomi's hands shook as she carefully moved his hands away from his ear. She tilted his head toward the light from the hallway chandelier. And there it was, deep in his ear canal, clearly visible now. Something dark, dense, irregular, not earwax. Something biological that didn't belong there. A mass that was pressing against his eardrum, blocking everything, causing the kind of pain that made a child collapse. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. She'd been right. Everyone had been wrong, but she'd been right. She looked at Julian's face. He was watching her, terrified, desperate, silently begging for help. And Naomi made a choice that would change all their lives. She pulled out her phone and typed quickly, I can help you, but you have to trust me. I promise I won't hurt you. She showed him the screen. Julian stared at the words. His whole body was trembling. He'd been hurt before by people who promised to help. Doctors with cold instruments and colder hands. Therapists who pushed and prodded, and made him try to speak sounds that felt impossible. But something in Naomi's eyes must have convinced him. Some truth he recognized. Some love he'd been starving for. Slowly he nodded. Naomi helped him to his feet and led him to his bedroom. Her mind was racing, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. She sat him on his bed and typed again. I need to get some things. I'll be right back. Stay here. Julian nodded, both hands still pressed against his ear. Naomi ran to the bathroom. She grabbed the first aid kit from under the sink, found the tweezers inside. Her hands were shaking so badly, she almost dropped them. She ran hot water, scrubbed the tweezers with antibacterial soap, then poured rubbing alcohol over them. She grabbed a flashlight from the utility drawer, grabbed clean towels. Her breathing was coming in short gasps. God, she whispered to the ceiling. If you're real, if you're listening, please don't let me hurt him. Please guide my hands. She'd prayed as a child in foster care. Desperate prayers that mostly went unanswered. She'd stopped praying years ago, convinced that God either didn't exist or didn't care about kids like her. But now, standing in a billionaire's bathroom holding tweezers and a flashlight, she prayed like her life depended on it, like Julian's life depended on it. Please. She walked back to Julian's room. He was exactly where she'd left him, small and scared and trusting her with everything he had. Naomi knelt in front of him. She showed him the tweezers, mimed what she was going to do. His breathing quickened. Fear flickered across his face. She typed on her phone. There's something in your ear that shouldn't be there. It's blocking everything. If I can remove it, the pain will stop. You might even hear again. But I need you to be very still and very brave. Can you do that?" Julian read the words twice. His eyes filled with something Naomi hadn't seen before. Something that destroyed her. Hope. He nodded. Naomi steadied her hands. She turned on the flashlight and gently tilted Julian's head toward the light. She could see the mask clearly now. It was larger than she'd thought, dark and dense, pressing against his eardrum. She took a breath, said another prayer, and slowly, carefully inserted the tweezers into his ear canal. Julian's hands gripped the edge of the bed, his knuckles turning white. Naomi's whole body was shaking. She felt the tweezers make contact with the mass. It was sticky, dense, years of buildup that had stolen this child's hearing and caused him pain every single day of his life. She hooked the mass gently with the tweezers, began to pull. Resistance. It wasn't coming easily. Julian made a sound, a tiny whimper that barely existed. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "Please, God, please." She pulled again, steady, gentle pressure, and suddenly she felt it. Release. The mass was coming free. She pulled slowly, carefully, holding her breath, and then it was out. It fell into her palm. Dark, wet, biological. Years of suffering condensed into something she could hold in her hand. Naomi stared at it, barely able to process what she'd just done. Then Julian gasped, a real gasp, audible, loud. His hand flew to his ear. His eyes went impossibly wide. He turned his head, looking around his room like he'd never seen it before, like the world had suddenly transformed. The digital clock on his nightstand clicked to 1:43 in the morning. The sound was soft but clear. Julian pointed at it. His mouth fell open. He looked at Naomi. His lips started moving, testing sounds he'd never heard himself make, experimenting with vibrations he'd felt in his throat, but never connected to actual sound. One word came out, rough, unpracticed, but unmistakably clear. Sound. Naomi's tears fell freely now. "Yes, baby," she whispered. Sound. Julian touched his throat, felt the vibration of his own voice. His eyes were huge, filled with wonder and confusion, an overwhelming sensation. "I," he said, the word strange in his own mouth. "Hear?" "You hear," Naomi said, her voice breaking. "You can hear." The word seemed to hit him all at once. The reality of what had just happened. 9 years of silence. And suddenly the world was full of noise. The hum of the heater. The distant sound of traffic 73 floors below. The ticking of the clock. The sound of his own breathing. Of Naomi's crying. Of life happening in audio instead of just visual information. It was too much. Overwhelming. Beautiful and terrifying. Julian started to cry. Not silent tears this time. Real sobs. Loud and broken and full of 9 years of silence, shattering open. Naomi pulled him into her arms and held him while he shook, while sounds flooded his world for the first time, while everything he'd known about himself broke apart and reformed into something new. "You're okay," she whispered into his hair. "You're gonna be okay." She had no idea if that was true. She had no idea what would happen when Dominic found out. She only knew that in this moment, she'd done something that mattered. Something real. Something that might cost her everything. But looking at Julian's face, full of wonder and tears and sound, she knew it was worth it. 3 days passed. 3 days of secret magic. Julian discovering his voice, startling himself every time he spoke, jumping at every noise. The elevator chime, water running in the bathroom, rain hitting the windows, birds chirping in the garden 73 floors below. Everything was new. Everything was miraculous. Naomi downloaded apps to help him connect sounds to words. She'd play a sound, dog barking, and show him the word. He'd repeat it, amazed by the noise coming from his own mouth. "Dog," he'd say, the word clumsy but clear. "Yes," Naomi would say, laughing and crying at the same time. "Dog." They kept it secret from everyone. From Ingrid, who came and went on her schedule. From the housekeeping staff, who moved through like ghosts. It was their private miracle, fragile and precious. But Naomi knew it couldn't last. Dominic was coming home Tuesday, and when he did, everything would explode. She tried to prepare Julian, typing explanations on her phone. Your father will be home soon. When he finds out you can hear, he's going to ask questions. He might be angry with me. But I need you to know something. This wasn't wrong. You deserve to hear. You always deserve to hear. Julian had read the message and hugged her so tight she could barely breathe. So she became extraordinary at the one thing she had left. She developed new surgical techniques that reduced operation time by 20%. She published research that changed protocols nationally. She won awards. At 29, she was the youngest person ever invited to present at the International Cardiac Surgery Conference. At 31, Columbia Presbyterian recruited her to build their LVAD program, the youngest person ever appointed to that position. They offer her resources, a team, the opportunity to save lives and train the next generation surgeons. She said yes. And then she met Daniel Loron. He was a pediatric oncologist, kind and steady, with gentle hands and a quiet strength that was the opposite of Julian's aggressive intensity. They met in the hospital cafeteria. She'd been reviewing surgical notes. He'd been getting coffee after a difficult day. He'd asked if the seat across from her was taken. She'd said no. They'd started talking. Daniel understood demanding careers, understood the weight of holding lives in your hands. But he didn't resent it, didn't compete with it. When Vivian had a surgery that ran 12 hours, he'd text, "You're doing amazing work. I'm proud of you. Come home when you can." When she got called in at 2 a.m. for an emergency, he'd kiss her forehead and say, "Go save them." He pursued her patiently, respected her boundaries, never pushed, made her laugh in ways she'd forgotten she could, made her believe that partnership didn't have to mean sacrifice. They'd married 2 years ago in his family's vineyard in Napa. 50 people. Simple and perfect. Daniel's vows were short and true. "I promise to celebrate your calling, not resent it. I promise to build a life where you can be everything you're meant to be. I promise to love you exactly as you are." And Vivian had believed him. Because, unlike Julian, Daniel actually meant it. When she got pregnant at 33, Daniel had been overjoyed, also terrified. He'd read every book, attended every appointment, monitored her stress levels obsessively. "This pregnancy is different," he kept saying. "You're safe now. We're going to meet our daughter, and she's going to be perfect." And now, 7 months pregnant with Sophie, Vivian stood at the pinnacle of her profession, internationally recognized, sought after, brilliant, happy, and somehow, impossibly, Julian Ashford had walked back into her life, needing her to save him. If you're not already subscribed, do it right now because the next part of the story will absolutely floor you. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever seen karma work this perfectly? Because what happens in that operating room will restore your faith that the universe keeps score. The week before surgery passed in a blur of tests and preparations. Julian was admitted to Columbia Presbyterian's cardiac floor. Hooked up to monitors, his life reduced to beeping machines and scheduled medications. Vivian checked on him twice a day, always professional, always surrounded by her team. She never came alone, never gave him opportunity for personal conversation. Julian's world was shrinking. His assistant Trevor brought files and laptops, but Julian couldn't focus. His company's board was meeting without him, decisions being made. His empire continuing while he lay in a hospital bed, helpless. Celeste visited once. She stayed 20 minutes, most of it on her phone. She looked uncomfortable around the medical equipment, impatient with his weakness. "This is temporary," Julian had said, watching her check her watch for the third time. "The surgery will fix it." Of course. Celeste had smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I have a presentation in an hour. You understand." She left quickly. Her visits became shorter, then less frequent. Then they stopped altogether. Meanwhile, Julian watched Vivian move through the cardiac floor like a force of nature. Other doctors deferred to her. Nurses lit up when she entered the room. Patients looked at her with hope and trust. He overheard a conversation between two residents outside his room. Dr. Laurent is a legend. I came to Columbia specifically to learn from her. Did you see that valve replacement she did yesterday? Textbook perfect. I heard she's going on partial leave after this next surgery. For the baby. Yeah, her husband insisted. Dr. Daniel Laurent. He's in pediatric oncology. They're like the perfect medical power couple. Both brilliant, totally supportive of each other. Relationship goals. Julian had closed his eyes, those words settling like stones in his chest. 2 nights before the surgery, Vivian came alone for the final pre-operative consultation. She pulled a chair beside his bed, her pregnant belly resting against a clipboard. Any final questions, Mr. Ashford? Julian looked at her, really looked at her. Why did you agree to do this? You could have refused. Conflict of interest. No one would have questioned it. Vivian tilted her head, considering. I thought about it. Discussed it with my husband. Actually, he said the choice was mine. That he'd support whatever I decided. What did you decide? That I took an oath to heal. That my personal feelings about you don't change the fact that you're a human being who needs help. That letting you die to prove a point would make me someone I don't want to be. Even after everything I did to you, especially because of everything you did to me. Vivian's voice was quiet but firm. You taught me what kind of person I never want to become. Cruel, selfish, willing to abandon people when they're inconvenient. If I let you die out of spite, I become what you were. Julian felt his throat tighten. I'm sorry for all of it, for how I treated you, for the affair, for what I said about the baby. I was cruel and selfish, and you deserved so much better. Yes, I did. Vivian didn't soften it. I deserved a partner who celebrated my calling, who showed up when he said he would, who didn't cheat and abandon me when I was pregnant. I deserved basic human decency. She paused, her hand moving to her belly. But, you know what? You leaving, as devastating as it was, freed me to become this. If we'd stayed married, I would have kept trying to make you happy, kept diminishing myself to fit into your life. I would have been competent, but never extraordinary. Surviving, but never thriving. You destroyed me, Julian. But from that destruction, I built something you never imagined I could be. So in a twisted way, I should thank you. Your worst action became my greatest catalyst. The words hit Julian like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. I'm glad you found happiness, he said quietly. Your husband, your daughter, your career. You deserve all of it. I know I do. Vivian stood, smoothing her scrubs over her belly. Get some rest, Mr. Ashford. Tomorrow is going to be a very long day. For both of us. She was almost at the door when Julian spoke again. Vivian, Dr. Laurent, are you going to be okay? Doing this surgery while 7 months pregnant? Is it safe? She turned back, and for the first time, he saw something like warmth in her expression. I appreciate the concern, but I'm not doing this surgery because I have to. I'm doing it because I'm the best, and you need the best. This is my last surgery before maternity leave. I'm going out on the highest note possible, saving a life that most surgeons would consider too complex to attempt. Even mine, even yours. She was in her late 30s, thin, with tired eyes and dark hair pulled into a messy bun. She wore jeans and a sweater that had seen better days, but there was something familiar about her face. Something in the shape of her eyes that Naomi recognized. Naomi Reeves? The woman asked. Yes, I'm Lydia Ashford. She paused, her voice catching. Julian's mother. Every thought in Naomi's head went silent. Can I come in? Naomi stepped aside, numb. Lydia entered the small apartment, looking around briefly before turning to face her. You gave my son his hearing. Ah, yes, I did. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Thank you for seeing what everyone else missed, for caring when no one else did. Naomi couldn't speak. Her throat had closed completely. How did you find me? She finally managed. Julian told me, Lydia said with a sad smile. During our visit last week, he wouldn't stop talking about you, about the woman who fixed his ear, who held him when he was scared, who saw him I didn't mean to overstep, Naomi said. You saved him, Lydia interrupted. Her voice was fierce now. You did what his father should have done. What I begged Dominic to do for years. She sat down on Naomi's second-hand couch, her hands trembling. Years ago, I noticed the same thing. The way Julian touched his ear. The wincing. I tried to tell the doctors. I insisted something was physically wrong. But Dominic was so focused on genetic causes. So convinced it was my fault. He dismissed me. Told the specialist I was in denial. That I was an overprotective mother seeing problems that didn't exist. Her voice cracked. Eventually, I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was just desperate to find a cure. Maybe I was the problem. You weren't, Naomi said. You were right. I was right, Lydia whispered. And it cost me everything. My marriage. My son. My entire life. The words hung heavy in the small room. Lydia wiped her eyes. Dominic has been calling me. Did you know that? Naomi shook her head. For 2 weeks now. Leaving voicemails. He sounds broken. Lydia's laugh was bitter. He had Julian examined by 4 different specialists. They all confirmed it. The blockage you removed was a cholesteatoma, a benign growth that had been there for years, growing slowly. It caused complete hearing loss, and it was entirely easily removable. So I didn't hurt him. You healed him, Lydia said. But more than that, you proved something. You proved I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't a hysterical mother inventing problems, that everything I'd told Dominic for years was true. What did he say? He hasn't apologized yet, Lydia said, still entering her voice. But he will, because I'm taking him back to court, with medical evidence that he dismissed a treatable condition for years, that he allowed our son to suffer because he was too proud to listen, that he destroyed our marriage over his own guilt and blamed me for everything. I'm getting my son back, Naomi, and I have you to thank for it. Naomi couldn't process it. Couldn't understand how her small act had created this avalanche. Lydia reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. Julian asked me to give you this. Naomi took it with shaking hands. After Lydia left, she sat on her couch and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a drawing. A woman with long dark hair holding hands with a small boy. Above them, musical notes floated in the air like magic. At the bottom, in careful handwriting, thank you for the sounds. I love you, Julian. Naomi pressed the drawing to her chest and wept. 6 months later, Naomi sat in the back of a courtroom, trying to be invisible. She'd been called as a witness to describe what she'd seen, what she'd done, what she found in Julian's ear. Dominic's attorneys had tried to paint her as reckless, unqualified, dangerous, but the medical evidence was irrefutable, for independent specialists had confirmed it. Julian's deafness had been caused by a cholesteatoma that had completely blocked his ear canal. Removable, treatable, curable. For 9 years, Lydia's attorney had presented emails, records of doctor visits, testimony from nurses who remembered Lydia, insisting something was physically wrong. All dismissed, all ignored, because Dominic Ashford didn't listen to his wife, because he needed someone to blame, and Lydia had been convenient. The judge, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense, had reviewed everything. Then she'd made her ruling. Primary custody granted to Lydia Ashford. Visitation rights for Dominic Ashford. Supervised twice monthly, pending completion of family therapy and demonstrated commitment to his son's well-being. It was the exact arrangement Dominic had once imposed on Lydia. His own punishment returned. Naomi watched Dominic's face as the verdict was read. He looked hollowed out, gutted, a man who'd built an empire but lost everything that mattered. She didn't feel triumph, just sadness. As people filed out of the courtroom, Dominic's eyes found hers across the room. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then he nodded once. A small acknowledgement. You were right. I was wrong. Naomi nodded back. I know. She left the courthouse and stepped into spring sunshine. Her phone buzzed. A text from Lydia. Julian wants to know if you'll come to dinner next week. He has a piano recital after. It would mean everything if you were there. Naomi's throat tightened. She typed back, "I'll be there." She slipped her phone into her pocket and started walking. For the first time in months, the weight on her chest lifted. She'd lost the penthouse, the money, the comfortable life. But she gained something infinitely more valuable. The knowledge that she was more than a beautiful face, more than a convenient escape, more than the survival mechanisms she'd built to protect herself. She was someone who'd seen a child in pain and chosen to act. Someone who'd risked everything to do what was right. Someone who mattered. The city stretched before her, full of noise and life and possibility. And for the first time in her life, Naomi Reeves felt like she could hear it all. If you're still watching, I need to pause here because this is important. This story isn't just entertainment. It's a mirror. Maybe you're watching this and you've been dismissed like Lydia, told your concerns don't matter, made to feel crazy for seeing what others won't. Maybe you're playing it safe like Naomi used to, keeping your distance, protecting yourself from caring too much. Maybe you're letting pride destroy you like Dominic, too stubborn to admit you might be wrong. Whoever you are, I need you to hear this. It's never too late to look closer, to care more, to choose courage over comfort. Drop a comment right now telling me which character you related to most and why. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because we're building something real here. A community of people who believe stories can change lives. Now, let me show you how this story ends. 1 year later, Naomi sat in the audience of a small concert hall, watching Julian's fingers move across piano keys. He played with fierce concentration, his whole body swaying with the music. Music he'd only begun hearing 18 months ago. Beside her, Lydia wept quietly, holding Naomi's hand. When the piece ended, Julian looked up, searching the audience. His eyes found Naomi's. He smiled, bright, unguarded, full of joy. She smiled back, tears streaming down her face. After the recital, Julian ran to her and threw his arms around her waist. "Did you hear it?" he asked, breathless with excitement. Every note, Naomi whispered. "It was beautiful. I played it for you," he said, "to say thank you for giving me sound." Naomi knelt down, cupped his face in her hands. "You gave me something too, sweetheart." "What?" "A reason to be brave." Julian hugged her again, fierce and tight. Over his shoulder, Naomi met Lydia's eyes. The other woman mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Naomi shook her head. "No, thank you for showing me what love looks like, what fighting for someone looks like, what being a mother looks like." She held Julian for a long moment, listening to the sound of his breathing, the murmur of voices around them, the beautiful noise of life happening. And she knew this was where she belonged. Not in a penthouse 73 floors above the world, but here, on the ground, in the mess, with people who needed her and people she needed, with the boy who taught her that sometimes the most important thing you can do is see what everyone else misses, and love fiercely enough to act, even when it costs you everything. Especially then, across the city, in a penthouse that felt like a tomb, Dominic Ashford sat alone. The silence he'd once craved now felt like punishment. On his desk sat a letter from Lydia's attorney. Revised custody arrangements. Julian would spend summers with him if he wanted, if Dominic could prove he'd change. On his phone, a text from Julian. "Dad, I'm playing Beethoven at the spring recital next month. Will you come?" Dominic stared at the message for a long time. He thought about the years he'd wasted blaming Lydia, the pain he'd caused, the son he'd failed to see. He thought about Naomi, the woman he'd dismissed, used, thrown away, the woman who'd loved his son more in 3 weeks than he had in 9 years. Slowly, he typed back, "I'll be there." Then he opened his contacts and scrolled to a name he hadn't called in 3 years. Lydia answered on the 3rd ring. "Dominic, I owe you an apology," he said. His voice broke. "For everything. For not listening. For blaming you. For destroying our family. Because I couldn't face my own guilt." Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, "I know. Can you forgive me?" "I don't know," Lydia said honestly. "But you can start by being the father Julian deserves. The one who listens. The one who sees him. I will, Dominic said. I promise. Don't promise me, Dominic. Show him. The line went dead. Dominic set down the phone and walked to the window. Somewhere in this city, his son was laughing, hearing, living, because someone had cared enough to look. Someone had been brave enough to act. Someone had loved Julian when it mattered most, and it hadn't been him. Dominic pressed his hand against the cold glass and made a silent vow. He would spend the rest of his life becoming the man his son needed, the man Lydia had deserved, the man Naomi had tried to show him he could be. It would take years, maybe forever. But for the first time in his life, Dominic Ashford understood. Some things can be bought. Some mistakes can't be erased. But some chances, if you're lucky, if you're willing to change, some chances can be earned. One small act of listening at a time. Outside, the city hummed with life. And 73 floors below, the world moved on, full of sound, full of hope, full of second chances for those brave enough to reach for them. So what does this story teach us? Let me break it down. First, see what others miss. Most people dismiss Julian because specialists said nothing could be done. But Naomi really looked, because she cared enough to see. Sometimes the greatest miracles come from simple attention. Second, pride destroys what love builds. Dominic's pride wouldn't let him admit he might be wrong. He blamed Lydia to avoid his own guilt. His need to be right cost him his wife, his son, years of joy. Humility isn't weakness. It's the door to truth. Third, you don't need a title to make a difference. Naomi wasn't Julian's mother, wasn't a doctor, wasn't anyone important by the world's standards. But she had willing hands and a brave heart. God doesn't call the equipped. He equips the called. Fourth, some loves cost everything and are worth it. Naomi lost her comfortable life, her security, everything she thought she needed. But she gained something priceless, knowing she mattered, knowing she'd change a life. Love isn't measured by what it protects. It's measured by what it risks. Maybe you're watching this, and someone has dismissed your concerns the way Dominic dismissed Lydia. Maybe you're afraid to get involved like Naomi was. Maybe you're holding on to pride that's destroying your relationships. Whoever you are, remember this. It's never too late to see what you've been missing, to care when it's inconvenient, to choose love over pride. If this story moved you, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications. We're building a community of people who believe stories can change lives, and I want you to be part of it. Second, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone struggling with pride, with guilt, with feeling invisible. You might change their life. Third, drop a comment telling me your biggest takeaway from this story. I read every single one, and your stories matter to me. I'm Mr. Parker, and I'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember this. The world changes when one person decides to see what everyone else missed. Be that person.